Okay, so hello everybody and thank you for joining us today for our Business Intelligence Using SQL 2012 webinar. So today we'll be joined by Richard Hartill and Jason LePage from North Door.
Good morning everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. As Sarah mentioned, my colleague Jason and I are going to do a demonstration this morning. We're from a business called North Door, which I know that some of you are familiar with. For those of you who aren't, we're an IT consultancy and we specialise in Microsoft technologies. We have a number of gold competencies, including business intelligence, data platform, application development and SharePoint. And we're the chosen consultancy for Byte Software Services when it comes for SQL and BI capability. So Jason and I today are going to briefly outline why people use business intelligence, particularly Microsoft BI, and then give a little demo of the Microsoft BI tool set. We'll then summarise what you've seen, provide options with regard to taking things further if you'd like to. So the purpose of BI is for a business to use all of the data that it has at its disposal to make better informed decisions and gain better insight into areas that you may not have previously had access to. The key difference being reporting and BI is that reporting has tended to be in the past a static activity with reports running on a scheduled basis, typically producing the same sort of reports. But with using BI tools, this enables the activity and the reports to become dynamic, which in turn allows users to drill into the data and explore areas that have not previously been possible. This of course allows the user to gain more insight into the business, which in turn hopefully provides a competitive advantage over your competitors. So ideally an organisation would have a data warehouse and be using master data management services to ensure that the data is being fed sensibly into the warehouse from the various business systems. And additionally, we'd recommend the use of data quality services to ensure that the data is clean. SQL 2012 provides those services, of course, but we're not going to be talking about that today. We're going to be demonstrating the BI tools that allows users to query and report on the data. I guess it's probably worth mentioning that you don't have to have a data warehouse. You can use Microsoft's BI toolset to review the data directly from your systems and pull it all together as you'd like to. A couple of important points I probably should make is that firstly, different people from a business using a BI product will obviously want to obtain different things from the data, and that certainly is something that business intelligence tools allows you to do. The other is that the great thing about Microsoft BI offering is that it's easily pervasive throughout the business, and most businesses will already be licensed for the commonly used features that you'd be using. This of course means that it's possible for all users and departments within the business to use the tools and benefit from that insight. I guess the basic requirements to gain access to the tool set are products such as Office, SQL Server and SharePoint, obviously products that most of your organisations will already have. So on that point I'll hand you over to Jason and we'll follow up after the demonstration.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jason LePage. I'm going to take you through a demonstration today of Power BI. Here I am in a Windows 8 workstation. I'm going to begin the demonstration using Microsoft Excel 2013. As you can see, this is Excel 2013. And throughout this demonstration, I'm going to play the part of an analyst working for a London market insurer. I'm going to take you through this scenario where I'm going to use features of Power BI to analyze the insurance portfolio for my business in different ways, combine data from various data sources, and then share insights through the Power BI platform. So the first thing I'm going to show you today is a feature of Power BI called Power View. So I'm going to click down here on the performance sheet inside my Excel workbook. And as you can see, this is actually a visualization in Power View. This is showing the performance by area of my business. Now, Power View is a dynamic way of visualizing data. So any Power View visualization that you see is typically very dynamic. Here you can see I can click on the various areas of my business. If we have a look here, I can see a particular area of the business, Eastern Europe, is potentially not performing particularly well. So what I'm going to show you today is how we can drill down into this area and try and determine why perhaps the business isn't performing so well in Eastern Europe. And what I'm going to do initially is show you another Power View within my workbook. I've clicked the Portfolio tab, and this is Power View analyzing the portfolio for the business by area. So you can see here we've got geospatially mapped data. This is showing all the policies that have been sold by the business plotted on a map. This being Power View, it's very dynamic. I can once again filter the data. As I click on a data element, for example Europe, you can see the class of business for the policies that have been sold on the bottom left here, and the makeup of the class of business of the policies in the area that I've selected. I can also filter the data in different ways. Perhaps we only want to see data from a particular region. Here we can see only data in the Caribbean, the Middle East. As I click on a region, you can see the class of business being filtered to show data that only pertains to that region. So let's have a look at Eastern Europe. So this is the region we know isn't performing particularly well. So the thing you'll notice when I click on Eastern Europe is that the bulk of policies sold in this region are property. I can click on the property element in this pie chart, and I can see plotted on the map where the property policies have been sold. I can click on marine. I can click on any data element in Power View. So you can see in this region we're not selling very many aviation policies. And if I look at the countries throughout the region, you can see the majority of business within the region is being done in Turkey. So in terms of insights, those are two insights I already have. Policies in Turkey and our low count of aviation policies in the region. So the data we're actually visualizing is coming, it was being visualized from model stored in Power Pivot. So Power Pivot is also an integral part of Power BI, and I can access my Power Pivot model directly from Excel. So Excel is really the strategic tool for Power BI, and the majority of Power BI tools are accessed through Excel. What we see here is all of the data that I've been visualizing. It looks very much like an Excel worksheet, but actually this data is stored in an in-memory compressed format. You can see this particular table contains over 1 million records. I can see a diagram view of my data model. And if any of you are familiar with data modeling, this should look quite familiar. This is a schema of policy data surrounded by different dimensions. For instance, the class of business, the broker who sold the policy. I've also got my policy history data. I can see the relations between the data. I can add new relations. And I can do this all within Power Pivot. What I'm going to show you next is how you can actually use Power View to build new views of your data quickly and easily. So what we have here is a view of the premium or the policies that we have sold listed by country in the form of a chart. What I'd like to understand is how premium has grown for each country. So I'm going to build a view of premium growth by country. I'm going to do it by making a few subtle changes to this existing Power View. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is add a new field to my view. So what we see on the right here are all the fields that are available from the various tables that I just showed you inside the Power Pivot model. So I'm going to add that to my list of values. There are very many different ways to view data inside Power Pivot. one very interesting visualization is called a scatter chart. So by changing this view to a scatter chart, I can now quite easily visualize the counter policies that have been sold for each country and our premium for those policies. So what I'm going to do is show how you can use a scatter chart to show premium growth over time. So one of the dimensions that I have in my model is the dates dimension, and one of the features of the scatter chart is the ability to show data changes over time. So I'm going to drag a field into my play axis, and you can see a timeline is being added to my scatter chart, and I can now visualize how premium has grown by country over time since this particular insurer's inception date to the present. What we can see here is that Turkey has the most policies sold and the most premium, followed by Russia. If I click on the data element, I can visualize how that data has changed over time. So it's a very effective way of visualizing data changes over a period of time. So we now know a few insights. We know that the Turkish region where we're selling our policies is doing particularly well, but we're not selling very many aviation policies. So what I'd like to do is show you another feature of Power BI, which is the ability to actually search for data sources and build a visualization that mashes up data between data that I have on premise or have in my existing Power Pivot model and data from another source. So I'm going to use a feature called Power Query. Once again, this is within Excel, and I'm going to perform an online search for data sources. So I'd like to better understand aviation business in Europe, and particularly in Turkey. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for busiest airports Europe. Power Query is going to go away and search for available data sources. It's going to search for data sources within my enterprise that have been published. For example, data warehouses, relational databases. It's going to search for public data sources in the Windows Azure Marketplace. And as you can see here, it's also searched Wikipedia. And here I can see a preview of each data source. So these are statistics for different years. And once I see the data source I'm particularly happy with, this is showing the busiest airports in Europe with passenger counts. If I like what I see, I can double click. And what Power Query is going to do is create a live connection to that data source. It's going to add a new worksheet to my workbook, and it's going to download the data, but it's going to retain that connection so I can refresh the data at a later stage. Seems like the internet is particularly slow. Come on, Power Query. There we go. So my data connection has been created. A new worksheet has been created containing that data. And I can now start visualizing the data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new Power View visualization over this data. I can do that very quickly. Once again, inside Excel, I click the Power View button. I'm going to create a new Power View sheet. What Power View will do by default is it will create a tabular view of the data from my sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the fields I'm not interested in. So I'm just left with the passenger counts. I'm going to change the view to a column chart. I'm going to start slicing and dicing the data. So perhaps I'd like to break up the data by city. As you can see, this is all drag and drop. I can accomplish this very quickly. I can add a filter by country. I can sort the data. And there we go. We've now downloaded the data from a public source and created a visualization. What we're actually looking at here is the difference in passenger numbers over 2 consecutive years. So passenger counts in 2011 and 2012. And what we can start to do is visualize where there are particular trends in certain cities. So for instance, you can see in London and Paris, the passenger counts increased, but only very slightly. However, in Moscow and in Turkey, or in Istanbul rather, you can see the passenger numbers have gone up quite significantly. So if we filter by country to Turkey, you can see here the increase in passenger numbers over a single year in Istanbul was 10 million. So it does seem to be validating my previous insight that perhaps we should be focusing on selling more aviation policies in Turkey. And BI is all about gaining insights. And once I have an insight to share with my colleagues, through using the Power BI tools, I can publish that insight and, through my workbook into the Power BI collaborative site. That's what I'm going to show you next. So I'm going to go into my web browser. So here we are. What this is the Power BI site in Office 365. What we're actually looking at here is published Excel workbooks. So you can see here one of the featured workbooks is my insurance workbook that I showed you earlier in Excel. And I've got a couple of other sample workbooks that I'll show you in a minute. What I can do inside the web browser, I can open up the workbook and I can access exactly the same Power View visualizations that I just showed you within Excel. But bear in mind this is within a web browser, so I could be doing this on a tablet. I could be doing this on a mobile phone. It's also, Power View is particularly good with touch-based interfaces. So all the dynamic features of the visualizations that I showed you work really well with touch. So there we go. You can see the same visualization displayed within the browser. It works in exactly the same way with exactly the same sort of fidelity. All the features work the same way. So it's completely consistent with the experience I had in Excel. I can access the different visualizations from the worksheet tabs at the bottom here. So here we can see my scatter chart visualization playing the same way within the browser. So there's one last feature of Power BI that I'd like to show you today. So I'm going to go back to my Power BI site, and that's called Power BI Q&A. So while that's loading up, let me briefly explain what this is. So when I published my Excel workbook to Power BI, what I published was my visualizations that can now be viewed within the browser, but I also published my Power Pivot data model. And what I can do within Power BI is I can allow the user to perform natural language queries over the Power Pivot data. So I can do things like, let's for instance see my paid premium for, oops, let's try that again. So that's showing me my paid premium for each of my policies that I've sold. Perhaps I'd like to see this for each country. I'll just enable that security warning. And what Power BI is now doing is real-time geospatially mapping my policy data. I can begin to filter this data in different ways, so perhaps I'd like to see paid premium for each country in Eastern Europe. And I'm going to get a similar visualization to the one that I manually created inside Power View. But bear in mind, this has all been created dynamically, real-time, via Q&A. But perhaps I prefer not to see this on a map. Perhaps I prefer to see this as a column chart. So I can say, please show this to me as a column chart. So as you can see, I'm having a conversation with the data. I can think of the way I would like to visualize the data, type in the query, and I can see the data plotted for me. Right now we're looking at a single data element, which is paid premium. Being an insurance company, we're obviously quite interested in our premium versus our claims. So perhaps I'd like to see paid claims as well. And there we can see paid premium and paid claim for each country in Eastern Europe. And we can see where which regions are most profitable and which regions where we've had a particularly high number of claims. Then another feature I can show you of Q&A. If I click on featured questions, you're probably wondering what these featured questions were when I showed you this earlier. These are questions that have been added to the system. I can simply click on that question and I can see the answer. So, for example, paid premium, paid claim, and incurred, sorted by year. If I click on that question, It will fill in the question for me, and because I've said sorted by year, Q&A understands the best way to show data sorted by year would be a line chart, and it displays a line chart. Bear in mind the visualizations being shown here are dynamically built Power View visualizations, so I can actually access the underlying filters in the same way that I could within Power View. I can even see the underlying fields from my Power Pivot model, so I can see exactly which fields are being plotted. One last thing I'll show you is how you can actually access data from different workbooks. So the Q&A questions that I've shown you thus far have been from my insurance workbook. If I click on this featured question, population of EU, this data is coming from a different workbook. This is actually from the World Bank sample workbook. So you can publish many workbooks up to Q&A, and Q&A will determine which workbook to use based on your question. It's a very interesting visualization here. Rural population versus urban population by year for India and China as a clustered column chart. And here we can see the point where the rural population in China became smaller than the urban population for the first time. So it's a very interesting visualizations you can build, and it's visualizations that the user of Power BI can dream up. And that completes my demonstration. There is a lot more to Power BI. There's a mobile app to consume reports on the go, and there's administrative features to maintain the underlying data and set up the schedule of when data will be updated if you're using data from your on-premise data sources. There's also a very nice geospatial mapping tool called Power Map. I'm going to go back to our presentation now and quickly summarize what we've seen. So what I showed you today inside Power BI, firstly how to find, combine and manage data. So we've seen how we can access data from different data sources and combine data from both internal data sources and external sources. I showed you how you can model your data within Excel using Power Pivot. What I didn't show you, but a feature that's very interesting, is you can create hierarchies and key performance indicators, and you can visualize those. You can create very interactive visualizations using Power View, and I showed you that today. Something I didn't show you today, but it's a very exciting feature. It's called Power Map, which is a way of geospatially mapping data onto a map of the world, and it's very powerful. And I suggest if you're interested in what you've seen today with Power BI, take a look at Power Map. If you go to powerbi.com, you can get more information about it. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Richard.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jason. Okay, so there's going to be an opportunity to answer some of your questions that you've entered into the question box. I guess in terms of if anybody wants to sort of follow up and make some more inquiries about looking into bringing Microsoft BI toolset into your organization, there's a couple of ways of doing that. One is to contact me directly. Obviously, we'd welcome the opportunity to speak with you. We have a lot of experience in implementing these types of projects into our customer base. My details are on screen at the moment, so you've got my number there and my email address. Alternatively, North will run business intelligence experience workshops, typically about once every 6 weeks, where we invite customers to come along and get a hands-on experience using the actual tools. So a relatively small session, 6, 7, 8 people, all with the computer, and Jason or one of Jason's colleagues talking them through and actually getting that hands-on experience, which is obviously very useful. So great. So Sarah, could we move over to the questions, if that's okay?
So we've got one that says, is this a standard feature in Office 365?
That's a good question. It's a standard part of Office 365, but it is something you have to license separately. So as I understand it, and I'm not a licensing specialist, you have to have an Office 365 E3 license plus the Power BI license to use Power BI. Having said that, there's quite a few things that I showed you today that are not Office 365 specific. For example, if you run a standard on-premise version of, or on-premise licensed version of Microsoft Office, you can use Power View within Excel and Power Pivot within Excel. Power BI specific features are the collaborative portal that I showed you, and the really cool Q&A searching more natural language feature. Those are Power BI specific.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And a question here from Phil, who says, how are the Power Pivot models shared to ensure everyone is using the same source?
It's a very good question. So what you typically do with Power Pivot models is publish them up to the Power BI portal, and by doing so, it's effectively sort of handing the model back over to IT, if you like. So the Power BI model might have been built by a Power user, and by publishing it, it gets handed back to IT, where they can take care of the security of the model, in other words, who can access it, when the data is refreshed in the model. So for example, you wouldn't want the model hitting your OLTP databases in the middle of the day if that has a performance impact on your transactional system, so the IT can control that. Those published models within Power BI can be accessed even through things like Power Query and used in different workbooks.
Okay, lovely, thank you. So thank you very much everybody for joining us today.